Sequels almost never live up to the original. For every great sequel, there are dozens that feel unnecessary. Sometimes they try to recreate the magic of the first movie. Sometimes they go in a completely different direction. Either way, they rarely capture what made the original special. And that's why I think Cars 3 is one of the greatest sequels ever made. Not just one of Pixar's best sequels, one of the best sequels, period. Please, just hear me out. The original Cars was a huge success. It wasn't considered one of Pixar's absolute masterpieces, but audiences loved it. Critics gave it respectable reviews, fans embraced it, and it made over $460 million worldwide on a budget of about $120 million. It was a massive hit. Naturally, Disney had a franchise on its hands it needed to milk. And that's where we got Cars 2. Now, I don't hate Cars 2. It's fun, entertaining, but if I'm being totally honest, it never really felt like a continuation of the story from the first movie. Instead of building on Lightning McQueen's journey, it became a globe-trotting spy thriller starring Tow Mater. Financially, it did great. It actually made more money than the first film. But creatively, it felt like it belonged to a different franchise. Then, 6 years later, Pixar released Cars 3. It earned better reviews than Cars 2, but it didn't make as much money. Ironically, I think if this had been the second movie instead of the spy movie, the Cars franchise would be viewed very differently today. Because Cars 3 does something that Hollywood almost never gets right. It solves the problem of an aging hero. Eventually, every long-running franchise reaches the same crossroads. What do you do when your main character can't realistically keep being the best forever? Most studios pick one of two options. Either they keep forcing the original hero back into the spotlight, hoping audiences won't notice the story has run out of ideas, or they shelve the franchise for years, wait until nostalgia peaks, and then bring everyone back for one last reunion. However, Cars 3 has created a third option, and it is brilliant. By the beginning of the movie, Lightning McQueen isn't the fastest racer anymore. A new generation has arrived. Cars like Jackson Storm are simply faster, they're better, they're more technologically advanced, and represent a future McQueen can't keep up with. For the first time, Lightning realizes he's becoming what Doc Hudson once was, the old guy. So, a wealthy sponsor buys up Rusty's and gives him one last opportunity to prove he still belongs on the track. And throughout the movie, it slowly becomes obvious where the story is heading. Cruz Ramirez shouldn't just be training racers. She should be a racer. Now here's where I think Pixar absolutely nails this. The obvious Hollywood ending would have been for Lightning to somehow beat everyone one last time. Maybe through determination, maybe through some last-minute miracle, or maybe because he's the main character. But Cars 3 refuses to do that. Instead, Lightning realizes something even more important than winning. He steps aside. He becomes the mentor, just like Doc Hudson was for him. It's not portrayed as failure, it's portrayed as growth. That's the genius of this movie. Lightning doesn't lose because he's weak. He wins because he understands that his greatest contribution isn't another trophy. It's passing everything he's learned on to someone else. That's an incredibly mature message, especially for a movie about talking race cars. And honestly, I think that's why this movie resonates with me so much. I have kids now. There are things I simply cannot do the way I used to. There are experiences I'll never get to have for the first time again. And if I were to just focus on that, it's depressing. But then I watch my kids discover the world. I get to help them find what they're passionate about. I get to watch them become better than I ever was. Suddenly growing older doesn't feel like losing something. It feels like gaining a new purpose. That's exactly what Cars 3 is about. It's about accepting that time moves forward. It's about letting go of nostalgia without abandoning the past. Because nostalgia isn't bad, it's comforting. We all miss the good old days. The problem comes when we refuse to move beyond them. Cars 3 doesn't tell us to forget the past. It tells us to honor it by investing in the future. That's a message that applies far beyond racing. But if you haven't watched Cars 3, and speaking of racing, If you're a fan of motorsports, this movie is packed with references and inspiration pulled from real racing history. There's definitely some bias on my part in that because I love racing. I've raced four-wheelers and all kinds of stuff. But even without it, I think the emotional core of this movie stands on its own. Cars 3 understands its characters, it respects its audience, it gives its heroes an ending that feels earned instead of manufactured. And in doing so, it accomplishes something very few sequels ever manage. It doesn't just continue the story, it completes it. That's why I genuinely believe Cars 3 is a perfect movie. And I think this quote from Doc Hudson sums it up perfectly. You don't have to know where you're going, just know where you've been. So what do you think? Am I completely wrong, or does Cars 3 deserve a lot more credit than it gets? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Like it, sub it, bye.